Hey guys, welcome to another video. I hope you're having a great day. Today we're going to be talking about this JFK Volume 1 by Fredrik Logevall. I believe in the US it was published under like a subtitle. I believe the subtitle was Growing Up in the American Century or something like that. So basically this is Volume 1 of what is going to be a 2-volume biography of JFK. And it covers 1917 up until about 1956 or so, and covers the family history, JFK growing up, JFK at school, at Harvard, at war, and then his time in the House and the Senate. So I'll just start talking about the author a little bit, and then we'll head into some more details on the book. So Logevall is I've got some notes here by the way, if I'm glancing down. He's the Lawrence D. Belfer Professor of International Affairs at the John F. Kennedy School of Government, and he's also a Professor of History at Harvard. And that comes through in here. You spend a lot of time talking about international affairs in here. So obviously he has expertise in that area, he has an interest in that area. He's written a lot on the Vietnam War in the past. He's actually won a Pulitzer Prize for one of his books on the Vietnam War. So you spend a lot of time sitting with the international affairs and examining JFK and his stance on international affairs and how they evolve. And JFK is almost a perfect study for that because he stands in such stark contrast to his father, and we've got some pretty good documents, as we'll talk about in a moment, tracking how JFK, his views on foreign policy evolved over time. So basically the book is quite new. It was published in September 2022, and it basically covers, as I said, everything up to JFK's run for the vice presidency. So we start with a background on the Kennedy family. On both sides we see the migration from Ireland, and the family setting themselves up in Boston, and then we see Joseph Kennedy go through his various exploits, Wall Street, in the armaments factories in World War I, and his basically push to try and get into the Roosevelt administration. Of course, he eventually gets a post, the ambassador to the Court of St. James's, which is a massive deal. Alongside this, we also watch JFK growing up. We see that he's quite separate to his family. There is a little bit in the book about how he's kind of neglected by his family a little bit. His mother, like JFK is a very sickly child and spends time in the hospital while he's away at boarding school, and his mother doesn't go and visit. And she writes letters to the school to find out what his condition is, but she doesn't go and visit. It's a little bit weird by modern standards. I'm not sure what it's like by those standards, but I feel like it's a bit strange. Now, pretty quickly you end up with JFK in Europe. He goes on a trip around Europe with his best friend Lem Billings in 1939. And it's a fascinating time for him to be traveling Europe because obviously Europe is on the verge of war. And his father, as the ambassador to the Court of St. James's, is right at the center of this debate of how, should we be appeasing Hitler? How should we be dealing with the situation? And JFK goes around Europe and he writes a series of diaries and letters, and Logevall has gone through what he can find of these and can track how that moment of traveling around Europe is critical to how JFK then starts to think about foreign policy, and in particular how he breaks with his father on things like appeasement, on things like isolationism. he starts to become much more of a globalist. He feels that America has much more of a place in the world than his father does. And then he heads back to Harvard, where he writes a book called Why England Slept. And it's basically about the failure of appeasement. And it's a brilliant case study of how someone like JFK, he was clearly a brilliant mind, and he was able to write this book, which was actually his final thesis at Harvard, and then was so good that it got published into a book and got sent around. Obviously, Joseph Kennedy sends it around to people, trying to show them how impressive his son is, basically. And then we move on to, obviously, the war. Okay, sorry, I just had to go deal with something. What I was saying is I read a review of the book a couple of days ago, and it was talking about how you can compare Donald Trump and JFK. They're both the second son of a wealthy, important person. The first son dies tragically. JFK's older brother died in World War II. And they take these different paths. Trump, when he's called up for the draft, gets out of it, uses connections, and comes up with an injury which he says that it excludes him from going to fight. JFK uses his connections to go to fight despite his ill health. And not only does he go to fight, he goes to fight in one of the more dangerous positions. He goes and fights on PC boats out in the South Pacific. Actually ends up getting shipwrecked and heroically saves his crew. So they take very different paths. I don't think it's worth lingering too much on that, that comparison between JFK and Trump, but I think that it's very respectable what JFK did during the Second World War. His brother obviously then goes and fights in France. He flies bombers, and he actually goes to take part in a very dangerous bombing run to try and basically bomb the bunkers where they're firing the V-2 rockets from. And because they're so fortified and dug underground, normal bombs don't do anything to these bunkers. So they load up these planes with the explosives, basically, and hook them up to a radio control. And Joe Kennedy Jr., JFK's older brother, was meant to fly the plane over close to the target and then jump out, and then someone from another plane would basically guide it and crash it into the bunker. Unfortunately, it all went wrong and the plane blew up while he was in it, and he dies. His body is never found. So it's very, very tragic. And that makes then Jack Kennedy the eldest son, and he kind of takes the mantle of the Kennedy name. When he gets back, he then goes and he runs for Congress. We follow that. He later then runs for the Senate as well. We follow that as well. We get to meet Ted Sorensen. Bobby Kennedy comes into the picture, and we see how Bobby Kennedy runs the campaigns, etc., etc. And then we finish the book with effectively JFK. He doesn't get the vice presidential nomination in '56, and he basically decides that he's going to run for president, and that is where we leave the book. So overall, I mean, it has a huge amount of detail. If you want to know about JFK, this is a great book. Obviously, we're waiting on the second volume. There's a lot of original research that's been done in here. I did note in my vlog that I think the book could have been 450 pages instead of 650. A lot of that foreign policy stuff, especially around the beginning of the Second World War, could probably have been left out. But other than that, I really have no complaints about the book. It's very well written, draws heavily on the primary sources. Just, yeah, very, 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 very enjoyable read. So the last thing I wanted to talk about was the physical book. I'm one of those people who likes a physical book. I dislike reading on Kindle. I like how my books look on my shelf. I like feeling the book. If you're not interested in that, like, feel free to click off at this point. But I've got a couple of thoughts about the way they've done this book. It's different to a normal book, and there's some things I like and there's things that I don't like. It's published by Penguin under the Viking imprint. And first off, it's a paperback, very thick paperback, but it holds together well, doesn't feel flimsy, and like I haven't creased the spine because the binding has been done in such a way that even though the spine bends, it doesn't crease. The other thing is the pages are really, really good thickness. Like, again, I told you this was going to be a little bit weird and nerdy, but they're a really nice thickness that you get a solid heft to the book. I've got other books, like, for example, the Penguin, like, classics, I suppose you could say. This is Stephen Cochrana's Biography of Stalin, which runs about the same length, a little bit longer actually. It's with the notes and everything, it runs to 1,000 pages, and it's got really thin, flimsy pages. These pages smudge easily, the ink doesn't stick nearly as well, and yeah, the typesetting is just a little bit like fuzzy sometimes. That's not the case. This is a very, very high quality book. The other thing that they've done is there's no plates in the book. Instead, they include pictures throughout the text. So, like, here's an example here of a diary, and there's plenty of photos through the book. Here's one at the campaign headquarters, I think this is when he's running for the Senate. So there's plenty of those all the way through the book. It means that you get the pictures in the relevant portion of the text. You don't get them like 200 pages later when you get to the plates. I think it's a really cool way of doing it. You don't get the super high quality, but you don't really need it for photographs. It's not artworks, it's not anything like that. So I think it works. I actually really, really like it. In terms of the cover, I very much like the cover, but I'm a little bit worried about what they're going to do about the second volume. Obviously, you've got the JFK. They lean into that instead of trying to write John F. Kennedy or whatever, John Fitzgerald Kennedy on here, they've just gone with the JFK, which I really, really like. It makes it like it's very obvious what this book is about. And they've got the volume 1 up there, and then like the color scheme is like inverted, I suppose, on here. So instead of having the the red background with the blue text, you've got the blue background with the red text. I'm a little bit worried with what they're going to do with the second volume. Probably what they're going to do is they're going to invert both of these so that they're opposite. So the second volume is going to be blue, and it's just going to be JFK, and then Fredrik Logevall volume 2, which is fine. It's just not going to be one of those ones that kind of stretches across the two books, which is okay. But yeah, basically, if you want to pick this up, definitely do. It's a great read. Volume 2, I think, is going to be excellent on the presidential years. And I think it's a really nice book to own. So those are my thoughts. Let me know what you think of the book, and I'll see you in another video. Thanks for watching.